with Phil Zito, episode 444. Hey, folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. In this episode, we will be discussing whether or not you should create your own training. So, a lot of folks right now are short people. That's no mystery. And a lot of organizations are going and looking at forming their own training internally in order to upskill and develop folks and really take their businesses to the next level by cleaning up the skill set gaps that are keeping them from getting there. But is that necessarily the best choice? Is that the best thing you can do with your resources? That's what we'll be discussing today. I'll be taking a look at the positive sides of creating your own training as well as the negatives. We'll be answering any questions you have. If you find this episode valuable, definitely like, subscribe, and share. Make sure to engage in the comments. This is live, so anything you ask, I will do my best to answer. If you're listening to it after the fact on iTunes, Spotify, etc., please consider leaving us a 5-star review if you feel that this was a valuable podcast for you. As always, everything will be available after the podcast at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/444. All right, so let's dive in. So you recognize, for whatever reason, maybe you're an executive and you're seeing that your backlog and your execution are kind of stalling out due to your ability to go and execute work. And you say to yourself, what's keeping me from doing this? And you realize that you're short people. Maybe you're short technicians, you're short programmers. Maybe you've got people who are retiring. Could be a multitude of reasons, but you've decided for whatever reason that you need to go and create your own training. For the past 6 years, Smart Buildings Academy has been creating training. We've created over 30 training courses, created a workforce development program that takes people from knowing nothing to making them field-ready technicians in less than 11 weeks. So we know a thing or two about creating training. I'm not necessarily opposed to organizations creating their own training. I know I'm fully aware of the bias that I have running a training organization. Obviously, I and my team benefit if an organization utilizes our company for training. That's a given. That being said, there are certain scenarios in which creating your own internal training actually does make a lot of sense. And there's certain scenarios that we'll discuss in this episode where it really doesn't make any sense at all. And I'll try to be fair on both sides. I will do my best to share kind of the logic behind when it makes sense and when it doesn't, and what I'm thinking. So, whenever you decide to make a training decision, you first need to look at kind of the intricacies of effective training programs. Because I don't know about you, but when I first started Smart Buildings Academy 6 years ago, I thought it was as simple as think what I needed to know as a tech, or ask a couple people what they need to know, slap together some videos, call it a day. That's going to really address things because I know best. And how wrong I was. There's a whole process behind how do you actually gather the needs? How do you understand like what is the true training requirements, etc. But let's first look at when it would make sense. So when it does make sense to do training is when you have some sort of unique process that is a competitive advantage to your business. There's quite a few customers of ours who have competitive advantages due to processes. The way they go and use remote installation resources, the way they run a remote operations center, the way they do their energy audits, they have unique processes from a evaluation, a design, an implementation, and a support perspective. And there's no organization out there, no matter what they say, that can train you on your own processes. Sure, like my organization could come alongside you. We could spend months shadowing your processes, really watching it, trying to figure it out. And we could put training together. I would say for us and for you, that wouldn't be a good return on investment. selfishly for my organization, I'm not going to be able to resell that because you should probably put that under an NDA and it's unique to your organization. It just feels icky going and reselling someone's custom processes. That doesn't feel ethical to me. Also, the ability to take all the tacit knowledge you've gained over the years and then turn that into some sort of training, that's really, really difficult. There's a lot of stuff that's in people's heads that is difficult to translate into training. And there it goes again, right? This freaking Arizona weather and my coughing. But as I was saying, it is difficult to take unique processes and translate that into training. That's something where it makes a lot of sense for you to do your own training. I'm going to take a sip of water. I had like this nasty chest cold, which is why we didn't have podcasts for a while. And it's just now clearing up, but it comes in waves where I cough and whatnot. But as I was mentioning, you going and taking your existing program, your existing processes and turning them into training. Here's how I would do it if I were sitting in your shoes today. First thing I would do is I would shadow the process. I would go and have someone watch the process and document that process. Then I would look at the modality. Modality is just a form of training that is best to teach someone that process. Maybe it's recording it on video. Maybe it's documenting it in writing. Maybe it's going and having some sort of on-the-job activity with a mentor overseeing you, and then you go and you execute that training. That is what I would do. So let's say you're ABC company and you have a way of doing site audits that's unique. Maybe you're using some sort of IoT sensors, and these IoT sensors enable you to remotely monitor different environments, quickly report that back to an analytics engine, and then you've got a set of predefined rules, and those rules will enable you to real quickly list out a series of energy conservation measures that you then will quote to a customer. And this is your site audit process. Going and creating a training on that would be multifold. First, how do we know what parts of the building we need to monitor? And how do we even know that this is a viable customer or a viable prospect? So you've got a selection training that you need to do for your sales team or for your prospecting team. How do I look at my existing and potential customer base to identify if it makes sense to do an audit? Then, how do we actually implement the audit? Do we create checklists? Do we create videos on how to go and install these sensors? Is it going to be us installing them or some sort of outside contractor? Then from there, how do we connect them? What are the various different ways that we could connect these sensors to our analytics solution in the cloud? And then how do we evaluate those? And then how do we quote? So you can create a training around that. And that is a good example of creating your own internal training. What's a bad example of creating your own internal training? If something is not a specific process, it's more common knowledge. I'm going to install this 0 to 10 volt DC sensor. I'm going to go and create this job drawing. I'm going to go and troubleshoot this network. Those are things that do not make sense to do internally. And there's a series of reasons why, most of all being that, one, that training is not specific to your organization. So most likely that training is going to exist in the market. The other thing is, if you get people up to speed on those skills, does that go and strengthen your competitive advantage? The things that are really keeping you in your position in the market. In most cases, it doesn't. So let's talk through in a little more detail, and then I'll get to the negatives of creating your own training. But, what are the intricacies of creating training? First thing you need to know is, why are you creating training? What is the purpose behind the training you're producing? And this seems like a fairly obvious question. So I come to the president of XYZ company, and he says they're creating training. And I ask him, why are you creating training? And he says to me, because we don't have enough people to do XYZ. Okay, but why are you creating training? Well, I just told you, Phil, because we don't have enough people to do XYZ. Okay, but why do you not have enough people to do XYZ? You can create training, but if it's because of your hiring processes or your retention, your inability to retain people, you underpay, you don't have, maybe your work seasonal, creating training could be a red herring. So you got to really understand why you're creating the training. If your talent management's on point, your hiring's on point, your retention strategies are on point, you have tons of backlog, okay, then in that case, it may make sense to go and train an inefficiency. But how do you know what the inefficiency is? Do you have the building, or sorry, the business systems to monitor your labor, to monitor, staff utilization? What tasks did your subs or your own employees do poorly on, inefficiently on? Do you understand these in order to make an informed decision on creating training? Next up is who will create the training. We're going to use our senior tech. Okay, let's run through this. I'm going to give y'all like a little inside glance into my business. It creates about 10 hours, or it takes about 10 hours to create 1 hour of training. So you need to ask yourself to do good training, and that includes storyboarding, lesson plans, collateral, running it through a beta, testing it, adjusting, etc. So if it takes 10 hours, and that's on the generous side, there's if you read the data, it usually takes significantly more. We're actually a pretty efficient organization for everything we produce. But if you take that into account, that it takes 10 hours, and your technician now, for that week to create that 1 hour of training, has lost on a 40-hour week 25% of their utilization and their billings that could have went to top line revenue. So are you willing to sacrifice that? Because an average training typically is going to take anywhere from 4 to 16 hours. Now, I know folks will say, we're going to bring our techs in, we're going to give them a 1 hour training, we're going to teach them how to do X. You're not going to teach them how to do X. I don't care what you say, it's not going to happen. It's going to be a turd. Because quite frankly, you pull someone in, let's say, we're going to teach them how to set up backnet MSTP trunks in an hour. Okay. Do they understand backnet MSTP? Do they understand wiring, the RS-485 standard? Do they understand how MAC addressing should work? Do they understand that at a level that they can communicate that to the subcontractor who's actually implementing all this in the field? You're not going to learn how to do that in an hour. It's just not going to happen. So this vision of, we're going to take our lead person and we're going to have them go and create training for 1 hour little segments during our team meetings, which are invariably going to be filled with other items that need to be communicated, so you really only get 30 minutes. Is that effective? And in my experience, it's not. So who will create the training? One, can you afford to lose that resource? Two, can that resource even create training? Can they storyboard out? Can they do stakeholder interviews? Because what you should do in a training, if you're dead set on doing it, you should do a stakeholder interview. That means meet with the managers, meet with the technicians, meet with whoever is impacted by the training. You need to understand their roles, do role alignment assessments, understand the job tasks they do, like really sit down there and figure all that out. Then you need to storyboard out that training. You say, okay, this person needs to install a 0 to 10 volt signal or wire on something. Do they know how to use a screwdriver? Do they know how to use the multimeter? Do they know how to test? Do they know electrical safety? You need to storyboard all this out, write it all out on the board and figure out all the potential risks, the dependencies. And only at that point will you be able to start forming a lesson plan. Then you got to say, okay, what modalities am I going to do? Is it PowerPoint? Is this hands on? Is this video? Is this audio? Is this a checklist? What collateral do I need? With all that put together, you then need some form of assessment. You need to go and say, all right, how am I going to test these people? How am I going to validate that they actually know what they're saying? That may be a skill assessment. That may be an OJT checklist. That may be a test. That may be knowledge checks, etc. There's a variety of different testing mechanisms. I actually have a book somewhere on this bookshelf that it's a really cool book on forming tests and for adult learners. It's pretty interesting. Once you have all of that, then you need to run the training. You need to then go and get feedback on the training. You need to then wait and see that it actually impacted the business and the KPIs that you're trying to impact, and then revise the training. So that is just creating the training in a nutshell. Once you've done all of that, right, you actually have to be willing to have people who can do all of this. And therein lies the rub, because your technician, quite honestly, is not usually the person who's capable of it. And this is something I had the hardest time as a training business owner, is accepting that the person who does the training is not going to be the super amazing technician who is out there integrating everything under the sun, the super tech. I thought logically, if I get a super technician, they would be the most amazing trainers. But training is, yes, you need baseline knowledge. I absolutely agree. But you need more than just baseline knowledge. You need the actual ability to teach and communicate. So, one of the things we noticed when we started doing training on different products, and we would have to go through different product training in order to get ready, is as we went through that product training, we would start to notice that we would have some assumptions as we were learning a product, because products constantly change. You have to stay up to date on different things. And if you have some sort of assumptions based on your own experience, it impacts how you teach. And so it's this weird dynamic that I don't feel like I'm effectively describing, but you almost, I saw this quote from Jeff Bezos the other day on LinkedIn feed. And he essentially was saying, you need to be an expert, but you need to have the mind of a beginner. He was saying, you can't go and build an e-commerce or a cloud platform if you don't have expertise, but you also can't depend on that expertise. And that's something we ran into as we started to pick apart our own lesson plans. Is like, okay, we're assuming someone knows this. Like, we would teach BACnet MAC addressing, and then we would assume that someone understood how to go and do the binary math to add up, the dip switches to make an address. And you can't make that assumption because it's so easy when you've done it so many times to naturally make that assumption. So that's one of the risks as well. And you have to have someone who can step away from that. And it's very difficult to find. Okay. So we talked about kind of the hidden costs. We talked about how to go about creating a training program. I want to talk about quality. Those of you who, after all of this, are still dead set on creating your own training, at least let's make it quality training. So let's talk about like what you can do. First off is you have to understand you have three types of learners. You have a kinesthetic learner, touch and feel. They use feeling words, I feel, it felt, etc. Visual learners, I see, looks like, etc. And auditory learners, I hear, sounds like, this is what you said, etc. There's different population breakouts based on parts of the country, on different parts of the world where, kinesthetic learners. Our industry tends to attract very kinesthetic and visual learners, not so much auditory learners. So people need to see, but then they need to do. And so whenever you're going to be doing a training, you need to be able to implement those in the training. Like, hey, I'm going to teach you something, but then you actually need to be able to go and do it. Actually, I realize I haven't checked chat in a second, and chat is a little funky here. So I'm going to check that real quickly. Let me just make sure everything is good. All right, we're looking good. Okay, perfect. All right, back to what I was saying. So you have kinesthetic, visual, and auditory learners. Majority of the technicians, programmers, etc., that I've met in building automation are visual and kinesthetic. What does that mean to you from a training creation process? What that means to you from a training creation process, quite simply, is typically you will teach with visual and reinforce with kinesthetic. And you want to do that in that order. You're going to initially present something. You're going to present the theory, the why, and the how, and then you're going to reinforce that how with kinesthetic. So people may ask, what does that look like? An example of what that would look like, quite simply, is one of the most underrated skills in our industry, which is simply the ability to go and research product documents. Let's say you're a technician, you're out on a job site, you run in, and let's say you work for Train, and you run into a carrier chiller, and you're like, okay, I need to integrate this carrier chiller into Train. And how am I going to do that? Well, you need to be able to go and first off, figure out, what is this chiller? Does it have a communication card? What language does this speak? What points are available? Do I need any tools? And so your ability to go and find product documents, right, is going to be critical. So one of the exercises we do in our BAS 100 course is we have people learn about product, and then we have them go and do actual research. We'll have them go find their manufacturer documentation and answer a series of questions. And that is taking everything we've taught them visually and now kinesthetically and visually having to go and find the documents and answer questions based on what they've learned. And that's an important skill. Like, I don't know what manager worth their salt who's been in this industry for more than 10 years has not had a call from their field tech going, I can't figure out how to tie into this, or I can't figure out how to discover the points or whatever. And then it's like, well, what have you done? Well, I discovered it because I kind of figured out it at BackNet, but nothing's working. Well, have you went and grabbed the manual? Well, no. Okay, so go get the manual and go see how this works. That little nuance right there will save a lot of, trip charges, a lot of rework, etc. And that's an example of building a lesson, building some sort of kinesthetic OJT or hands-on exercise. And then you validate that, right? You validate that through knowledge checks. You validate that through testing. There's a big thing that I've recently embraced. If you can read, you can be a hero. Yes. That's why I like hiring former military people, because we're stuck out in the middle of nowhere. And I was just reading someone's comment in the chat. If you guys are like, why did Phil just say that? But you'd be stuck out in the middle of nowhere with just manuals, and you'd have to figure out how to make things work. And that capability really translates quite well to field work. The one thing I see a lot of organizations that are stepping into training programs, and by the way, start typing in your questions. If you have any questions about creating a training program, anything like that, start typing them in. I will share with you kind of whatever best practices I can. But one of the things I see kind of fall apart is, yes, create the videos. Yes, create the hands-on training. Yes, create the PowerPoints. But do you have a lesson plan? Can you drop dead and someone else can come in and teach this? And maybe they're not going to be as good as you. Maybe they're not as good of a communicator. Maybe you're like better at emoting and really sucking people in by voice inflection, things like that. But they can get through the training, they can teach it. That's something that is largely missing when I see folks self create training programs is they don't create lesson plans so that anyone else can deliver the actual training, and that's something that's really important. Additionally, I don't see people doing stakeholder interviews and storyboarding. I literally just see people slapping together PowerPoints. Okay, but let's say you don't want to create training for yourself, but you still need to do some training, right? You got to train owners. You got that 8 hours mandated at the end of a project. How can you take everything I taught you today and actually put it into something practical? Well, the first thing we would do is we would follow our process, our stakeholder interviews. What do most owner operators want to know how to do? Well, they want to log into the system. They want to navigate graphics, change schedules, adjust points, etc. What do most owner operators call and claim as warranty work? Well, points offline. They don't understand how to read the graphics. They don't understand how to do XYZ. Okay. What is the issue or the area that you're installing technicians or project managers run into the most with the owner operators? Once you've narrowed down all of this, then you storyboard it out. What does a day in the life of an operator look like? What do they have to do? Well, they show up, a bunch of stuff's offline. Oh, crap. Temperature's too high. This isn't working. What do I do? Well, then they have to go and they have to go into the system and actually troubleshoot. They have to look at alarms. How did they get to the alarms? Oh, crap. I forgot how to get to the alarm history. How do I read the alarms? How do I sort them? How do I filter them? I've got too many of them. How do I make sense of all of this? This is all stuff day in the life that you want to storyboard out. Once you've figured this out and you figured out what people do on a day-to-day basis, then you create your lesson plans. Step one, this is your building automation system. This is where you find all your documents. This is how you navigate your O&M manual. This is your resources for actually like navigating the system. Step two, how do you log in? So you got a lesson plan on logging in. What? And then you think of your misuse cases in these lesson plans. What if I log in and my password doesn't work? What do I do? What if I log in and the server's offline? What do I do? And so you can kind of spider these lesson plans into supporting lesson plans. So you can have a main lesson plan and you can have supporting lesson plans and you can have exercises that they walk through and you can have checklists and videos, etc. Once you've listed all this out and you've done this for each part of their day in the life, then you have a solid, repeatable lesson plan and associated collateral. Maybe it's videos, maybe it's lessons, PowerPoints, etc., that any technician can deliver. They literally just follow the lesson plan. And then you validate it, you get them to sign off. And the end goal here is reducing callbacks, reducing slippage, reducing dissatisfied customers, getting customers engaged with the system they purchased. Put all that together, and you now have created a solid training. So this is an example of how you would use all that together. So I'm going to see if there are any other questions. Otherwise, that is what we covered for today. I hope this was beneficial to you. Hope it gave you kind of an inside look to how training is created effectively, the hidden costs behind training, the impact it may have if you decide to use your most expensive resources to do basic training skills, and should give you some things to consider as you go about whether that's owner training or your own internal process training, etc. If you all found this information valuable, definitely like, comment, and subscribe. I definitely appreciate you all being here. Thank you, Andrew, for all the comments. And I will say one thing to take away from all of this is an iterative process. We did not become the organization we are overnight. We've refined ourselves constantly over the past 6 years, and it's going to take you all time. I would say, in order of importance, um, owner training is something that you can easily document and create templates and everything for right now so that you can train your owners. Some companies choose to resell our owner training course. That's another option. Then from there, document your key processes, the things that are unique to your business, and train on those. The final thing I would say, once you've done all of that, if you're dead set on creating training internally, just feel free to reach out to me. Send me an email, or send me a LinkedIn message or YouTube message, whatever, and just say, hey, we're thinking about going down this path. What are your thoughts? I'd be more than happy to share my experience running a training organization, to help you kind of avoid and really make the decision if it makes sense for you to pursue or not to pursue. And then if you do pursue it, to avoid kind of the potholes I've stepped in along the way. So thank you, everyone. It's good to be back. We do have another episode coming up soon. It'll be a surprise because I'm not 100% sure that I've sold the person who's on it onto letting us air the recording. But I do appreciate all of you being here. I hope you had an amazing Thanksgiving. If you are still looking for a place to find to spend those end of year training funds, definitely reach out to us. I do recommend you take our skill assessment first, which is going to be at smartbuildingsacademy.com/skills. That free assessment's really going to help you pinpoint what you do and do not know, really help you like identify any gaps. I do appreciate you all. If you have anything else you all would like us to cover in the near future, let us know. And that being said, I'm going to end this. Thanks, everybody. Hope you all have a great rest of your week. Take care.